Gary, afternoon.
Hi Joe, how are you?
I'm very well. I hope you are as well. Obviously very concerning news. When did the news come through of the positive test to the player?
It came through late last night, Joe. So obviously that had implications then for those that were deemed to have close contact. So we got the results about 9 o'clock, and we had the deadline with the squad then by 11. So we had a hectic night last night.
And you have to go through a process, I presume, of identifying who is a close contact. How do you deem that? How do you find that out? What protocols are in place to establish who was and who wasn't?
Well, we followed the HSE guidelines and the UEFA guidelines in relation to definition of casual and close contacts. So any infected person has to do a detailed report, and then we would look at our own records, flights, buses, dressing rooms, restaurants. We had a level 2 in Slovakia, so you go through who was with who. So it's quite a detailed process, but it follows the protocols that are laid down by both the HSE and UEFA.
For privacy reasons, we're not naming the player who was tested positive, but we can certainly say that Callum Robinson, John Egan, Alan Brown and Callum O'Dowda have been deemed close contacts. Just to clarify, they're out of the Finland game regardless of whatever test they may or may not have.
Well, I mean, anybody who's identified as a close contact of someone who with a positive test is out of the matches yet.
Okay. It's been an eventful week, to say the least. Can we just look back on what happened around Slovakia for a moment and just get some clarification on a few points? As I understand it, a non-footballing positive occurred on Monday, and he was replaced by a colleague with the same skill set, and that new colleague tested negative on Tuesday before being admitted to the bubble and flew out to Bratislava. It was on Wednesday that person tested positive, Gary.
Yeah, so he had to have a UEFA test. He had an under-21 test, so he had a UEFA test on Wednesday in Bratislava. We were then told very late on Wednesday evening that test was positive. We then had to immediately put in the protocols that we'd agreed. So that resulted in 2 players having close contact. And we then had discussions with the HSE around what that meant on most of Thursday. The reality is they were sitting with 1.7 metres and they were wearing masks, and it was on a flight that was sanitized. So we were trying to make a case that the risk associated with it was acceptable, and we were having those discussions with the HSE. And as it turned out, the person had 2 negative tests since they'd come home.
So just to clarify, this is a charter flight. Correct me where I'm wrong here. As I understand it, management team front of the plane, so Stephen Kenny and his backroom staff front of the plane. The players are in the section behind them. Behind the players then we have the backroom staff towards the rear half, the non-plane backroom staff. And then the final rows of the plane, they're for FAI officials. Is that about right? Is that the geography of the plane?
Yeah, typically it is. But, I mean, I think, Joe, to be honest, that's a bit of a red herring in terms of where people were sitting, because you basically do all the testing before people get on the plane. So everybody is deemed to be negative in line with protocols. So you're not expecting anybody to be positive. And it was just looked at that the 2 players went to the back of the plane. And to be honest, I think it's a bit of a red herring, to be honest, in relation to the overall problem.
But it's not just look if we have designated seating. Like, there's designated seating for a reason, and there's no need. This is a 3-hour flight. Like, I understand if you're walking down the corridor by someone, you don't necessarily have to, turn around. But when we're talking about 3 hours on a plane together, I don't think it's just necessarily down to luck, and the HSE guidelines are there for a reason. So Connolly and Idah walk to the back of the plane.
Just to be clear, the HSE guidelines don't dictate who sits where on the plane.
No, I'm talking about the 2-metre guideline. So, I mean, I know it's close, and I accept it's close, and that's very unfortunate.
To be fair, anybody could have ended up being positive. I mean, that's one of the issues at the moment that we have, is that you're deemed to be a negative at a point in time. So, sure. With the player that has ended up being positive, they had a negative test on Tuesday. So anybody on that plane could have ended up with a positive test. As it turned out, the person who had the positive test in Bratislava ended up having 2 negative tests.
I understand that, but players missed the game, and it's a huge game, and Stephen Kenny's clearly upset with the whole situation. What I don't understand is when 2 players, Connolly on his 4th away trip, Idah on his 2nd away trip, walk to the back of the plane, and they sit down, and I don't know, is that in your vicinity? Why does nobody say to them, go and sit with the other players? Like, there's going to be I understand there's an internal review happening. I just don't understand why that wouldn't have happened. That's surely a big mistake.
I think, listen, we are going to carry out a review with both, I think, UEFA and the HSE in relation to all the protocols that are in place. I think the fact that they were sitting on the plane, it could have actually happened to anybody. The reality was the plane was delayed. We were an hour and a half late. We were getting on the plane. Everyone was rushed to try and get up. The two players went down, and the two officials just sat in the middle of the plane, and we never said any more about it. It was as simple as that. And I think, to be honest, of all the issues that we're going to review, where people sit on the plane is probably the least issue, to be honest.
I don't understand that, though. It's where they were sitting on the plane is the reason they missed the game.
No, the reason they missed the game was because the person who actually had a positive test on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Effectively, that person ended up with 2 negative tests. So that could have happened to anybody, and it did happen. I mean, we've had a player now that is positive. And, there are 4 people now who can't play today because they've lost contact.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So,
and look, there's no issue whatsoever with that. Like that, we are in extraordinary circumstances, and that is going to happen, unfortunately. And so I fully accept that. Like that is just deeply unlucky. But when there's an area on the plane for players who obviously under the circumstances of a huge match are probably very, very important, for obvious reasons. No one's health is more important than anyone, but in terms of getting these players onto the pitch safely, it doesn't make sense to me that you watch 2 players leave the group for 3 hours, sit at the back of the plane, not just keep them all together like that. I don't know. You're saying in your review that's not an issue at all.
No, I think, listen, we review everything, but just think about what happened. We've had a positive player, and now we've 4 players who can't play.
Sure.
We had a positive team member on Tuesday or Wednesday when he was, and only 2 players couldn't play.
Yeah.
So actually having all the players together, in hindsight, I think we need to think about where people will sit on the plane and review it. But we've actually had 4 players out as a result of the players sitting together.
I accept that, but it's probably difficult to keep players apart when they're so involved together. I would have said that on the flight, players giving it to each other is probably unavoidable, I would say, when there's a breakout. But a non-footballing member of staff on a plane giving it to a footballing member of staff, that would strike me as avoidable.
Well, I think, everybody has clear roles and responsibilities that are on the plane. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So we need to review the roles and responsibilities we would have. But nobody travelled on the plane that we didn't need there. So the fact, when you think about it in terms of what actually happened, we had a player who was positive, and now we have 4 players who actually can't play today. So I think the point of where they're sitting on the plane is irrelevant, to be honest. I think we need to sit on the side. The assumption you're doing with all the protocols and all the tests beforehand is that everybody gets on the plane is actually negative. What has happened, and it is a lesson, is that subsequently these people can become positive, and then it does have quite significant implications. So we do need to sit down and review that process with UEFA and the HSE in relation to the guidelines we've agreed with them.
Okay, so you're not actually sure having the players sitting together is the best thing. That's what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying we had the players. If you look at what happened with our positive test last night, we've now lost 4 players because they were sitting together. So I don't think where they were sitting on the plane is that relevant. I think what we've got to look at is the protocols that we're following, both with UEFA and the HSE. You're doing all the negative testing, so the assumption you have is everybody is getting on the plane is negative.
So what's the solution then? Dan McDonald reported that squad members have queried whether plans should have involved a bigger plane. Did any of those squad members make that point to you, or a second plane?
Well, we're looking. The reality is that there was 53 on the plane. If we followed those guidelines, we would have needed 4 planes. We would have only been able to fit 16 on the plane. And I think, Joe, that needs to form part of a review. We will look at that. But we're using the same plane that international teams are using. In fact, Wales are actually going home on the same plane that we travelled on.
Sure.
So I think it would be a huge financial burden for international teams if you have to comply with the 2-metre rule on the plane. And I'm not sure that's financially sustainable. And I think that needs to be fed in as well as part of the review with UEFA and HSE.
Okay. UEFA, I suspect, are increasingly nervous about this situation, given the outbreaks, and there's more games to come. Next month, there's Wales, there's Bulgaria, there's Bosnia. Each of those matches is worth a lot of money. If those matches are cancelled, where does it leave the FAI regarding scheduled repayments to banks, Gary?
Well, we've always assumed, we always assumed that we wouldn't qualify for the Euros. And in the absence of fans attending games, it doesn't have a huge impact, to be honest, Joe, because we're not getting any income. We can't sell tickets. So therefore, we already have sort of agreed terms with UEFA on TV rights, etc. So it won't have huge implications. I think UEFA will learn, and we'll all sit down and learn from. Bear in mind, this is the international football is probably the first sport to start competing on an international level where clubs are releasing players. And there's a bit to learn from that. We can review it, and we will sit down and try and seek a meeting with both the HSE and UEFA to try and see what we can learn from it. But I think they will be determined to play the matches.
Okay. Connolly and Idah are back with their clubs. Are those clubs going to release them for the Finland game Wednesday, or is that even within the regulations?
We're reviewing that at the moment with the HSE. I mean, on the basis that we've had 2 negative tests, we're trying to establish now whether the close contacts of that positive test would make the players available. And Stephen is dealing with that. He's concentrating on the match now at the moment.
Sure.
But he is looking to increase the squad for Finland.
And what if the clubs say no, frankly? If they say, after all the messing, the positive test in the squad, will the FAI leave it be? Or if they're within their rights, will they demand the players are released?
Listen, we need to have a reasonable relationship. We've had a very good relationship with both Brighton and Norwich. I mean, I was speaking to both of them. I mean, they were particularly concerned. That's why we didn't issue any communication around the 2 players. So I think we have a good, healthy relationship with them, and I think if we want players to play, I think they won't send them away.
Okay. Have any other clubs requested the return of players?
Well, we obviously have to communicate with the clubs on 4 players that have had close contact, and there's a formal process in place for that as well, and we would have communicated that to them this morning.
Okay. And what if they do now, in light of this positive, Gary? If clubs get on and say, look, we just don't like the look of this, can you release our players? What's the FAI stance on that?
Well, we link in again with UEFA. I mean, there are clear rules around clubs having to release players, and clubs all over Europe are going to look at the learning this week. I mean, countries all over Europe have had difficulty with this. The pandemic is definitely causing issues. We need to deliver it in a safe environment, and we need to make sure the protocols are developed to learn from what's happened, and convince the clubs that there isn't any additional risk.
Okay. Nathan Murphy, I know you're standing by at the Viva Stadium. Anything else of note?
I was just wondering, Gary, have you spoken to Stephen Kenny about this? Because he did seem very frustrated in his press conference yesterday, and you can't escape the fact that if Connolly and Idah had sat where they were meant to sit, that they would have been available to play on Thursday. And he said that he felt that the staff member who had initially tested positive was non-essential in terms of travelling on that flight. Have you spoken to Stephen Kenny about what happened, and have you got a sense of his frustration?
Listen, Nathan, of course I do. I mean, Thursday was a big match for us, and we lost it. We couldn't pay 2 players. We will define the roles and responsibilities. Stephen's part of our team, so I think he did say yesterday that we will have an internal review. I think from our point of view, the person who travelled is a requirement to UEFA, and he does have a role and responsibility that is required. So I would disagree with him on that in terms of, did we need to bring somebody on the plane? We did. The reality, as it turned out, was that person was negative, and we've had 2 negative tests since. So that's where the problem occurred. We had 53 people on the plane. Each one of them had a role and responsibility. They were all tested before they went, and I think what you do is you bring the right people to support the team, and that's what we did.
Just one last thing, watching the players coming out and the backroom staff here at the stadium half an hour ago, some are wearing masks, some aren't. I'm not sure what the exact protocol around that is. Have you been working with anybody outside the FAI in terms of the risk management around COVID and what exactly the correct protocols are for the players and everybody around?
Yeah, I mean, we had to submit. I mean, the reason we got the green status from the HSE to be able to hold the international matches is we have got clear protocols. We have our medical team, and I was there for the week, and we were notified every morning. We had to fill in forms. It was reinforced every single day, exactly what we had to do. So, yeah, I'm happy that, listen, like everything, we're going to review it and see, in terms of best practice, are the protocols fit. for purpose. But those protocols have been laid down by both the HSE and UEFA, and we follow them. So I think we will need to review, or they will need to review them, and we'll be happy to do that. But having been a part of it for the last week, I can tell you they are quite stringent.
Can I ask just a question, Gary? If Idah and Aaron Connolly had sat in their designated seats, and if positive or false positive, as it turned out to be, had happened around them, I presume in their designated seats they would have been 2 metres away from everybody, or would they not have?
No, they wouldn't have. Everybody had the same distance, so so they wouldn't. No, that's why I think the thing about the players where they were sitting, and I think, to be honest, the positive test with 4 players out actually proves that point.
Yeah.
In that we lost 4 players, so having all the players together, if I learned anything about it, is I wouldn't put all the players together in the circumstances that we're in.
Okay. Listen, I know you have to go. Thanks so much for coming on and taking those questions.
Not at all, Joe.
No, it's appreciated.
All right.
Gary Owens there, interim CEO of the FAI. Nathan, so Gary Owens there is pretty clear. He doesn't accept that the players sitting in their non-designated seats. Have we lost Nathan?
Hello?
Sorry, you're back now.
I'm back.
Sorry. He doesn't accept that the players sitting towards the back of the plane is the issue. He makes the argument, in fact, that we've lost more players by dint of players sitting together today.
But they're 2 separate issues. So he's correct that clearly the way the plane was filled meant that people had to be within 2 metres of each other, and now it seems from what he's saying that the 4 players were ruled out because they were sitting within 2 metres of one of their teammates. So the players were sitting together. The problem with Idah and Aaron Connolly is that they weren't sitting with the players. So you can't get away from the fact if they sat with the players for Thursday,
yeah,
they would have been fine for the match.
Yeah, for Thursday they would be. I do accept his point generally. He's not even sure that's best practice going forward.
No, and they're going to have a lot of issues trying to figure that out as to how big a plane do you need, and who is let on that plane, and how many planes do you need then to go to cover one match, like they're going to Finland in a couple of days. But for the simple game of Thursday night, the huge match against Slovakia, if the 2 players had sat with the rest of the players, you would have to expect they would have been fine to play in that game. Now, that's not to say coming back then they wouldn't have been sitting beside the player who has since tested positive and been ruled out.
Yeah.
Is there information on the test itself, where it was done?
Slovakia.
By a Slovakian lab?
Well, I mean,
Stewie's going full on conspiracy theories.
That to me is the most obvious. Like, I mean, is there more information on the false positive test?
No, not yet.
Because it's just bizarre.
I think it happens in 1 in 500 cases.
Right, just our luck.
Statistically, just our luck. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was Hamzik who did the test, Stewie, if that's what you're kind of suggesting.
No, genuinely wouldn't mind knowing a little bit more about it.
Yeah, no, sure.
And people don't seem to be saying an awful lot about it, because it has caused so much. I mean, that seems to me to be the real core of the issue here, is that we had a false positive